Alejandra Farias, and today I'm going to talk about the Battelle Developmental Inventory Second Edition, which is abbreviated BDI-2. I will talk about the requirements to administer the test, the purpose of this instrument, type of scoring, scoring procedures. I will also provide some examples, show you a demonstrational video, and how this assessment is implemented in my district. I'm first going to give you a little overview about this instrument. The Battelle Developmental Inventory Second Edition is a standardized assessment battery individually administered to children from birth to 7 years, 11 months. The Battelle Developmental Inventory Second Edition is a revision of the Battelle Developmental Inventory developed in 1984 by Jan Newborn, which was developed as a response to the need for assessments that measure the developmental progress of young children. It is important to mention that this instrument was developed under the theory that children achieve specific developmental milestones in sequence, and that reaching milestones generally depends on mastering preceding milestones. It's also an early childhood favorite. The BDI-2 also contains an efficient and comprehensive screening test. The Battelle Developmental Inventory consists of 450 test items grouped into 5 domains. These domains are adaptive, personal social, communication, motor, and cognitive. It is also important to mention that this assessment tool is also available in Spanish. Administration. The examiner qualification level has been set to low, which means the customer is qualified to purchase general screening, counseling, and instructional materials, as well as developmental tests. The level of education required is a bachelor's degree in psychology, school counseling, occupational therapy, speech-language pathology, social work education, special education or related field, or a certification in occupational therapy, physical therapy, or other medical field. Procedures. Administration of the test can involve 3 types of procedures. Structure, which requires the examiner to obtain the information in a controlled one-on-one setting, in which the examiner uses multiple methods to obtain the response from a child. Observation assesses behavior that takes place during a child's normal activities in an educational setting, a home, or in another natural environment. The behaviors must be demonstrated consistently and over time. Lastly, we have the interview procedure. It's used specifically in the earliest ages, for which the best information comes from the parent, caregiver, or teacher, who in this case becomes the respondent. The examiner asks them to describe the child's behavior under specific conditions and frequency. Components of the test kit. This kit includes a complete set of Battelle Developmental Inventory 2 manipulatives, 5 test item books, examiner's manual, stimulus book, set of presentation cards, 15 complete record forms, 15 normative update student workbooks, and a blue canvas carrying case. Now I'm going to talk about the purpose of this test. This test actually has a lot of benefits, especially for early childhood. The Battelle Developmental Inventory 2 meets all 5 developmental areas covered by the Individuals with Disability Education Act, IDEA. Motor, adaptive, cognitive, personal, social, and communication. And is ideal for several uses. Some of those uses are screening of key developmental milestones for school readiness, assessing current developmental strengths and needs, measuring longitudinal growth of development, determining eligibility for special education services, which is very important, especially at that age. This instrument is also useful for evaluating children across various programs, including preschool, daycare, early intervention, kindergarten, and Head Start. It also evaluate is good for evaluating early childhood programs for accountability, assisting in development of individualized family services plans, and the individualized education programs like IEPs. It is important to mention that this assessment provides a great deal of information to teachers in preschool, kindergarten, and primary school levels on the developmental and functional skills of young children. Domains. The Battelle Developmental Inventory measures 5 domains. The adaptive domain, which measures the child's ability to use information and skills acquired in the other domains. This domain includes personal responsibility, like initiate play and other meaningful activities, carry out tasks with minimal prompting, and avoid common dangers, and demonstrates care and caution. Another subdomain of this domain is self-care, like eating, dressing, grooming, and preparing for sleep. The personal domain assesses the ability and characteristics that allows a child to engage in meaningful social interactions with adults and peers and to develop his or her self-concept and sense of social role. Some examples of adult interaction are if the child is aware of and identifies familiar people, helps an adult with simple tasks. Some examples of self-concept and social role has to do with the child being able to express emotions. Is the child aware of differences between males and females and copes effectively with aggression, criticism, and teasing? Examples of peer interaction are plays cooperatively with other children and recognizes basic similarities and differences among all children. In the motor domain assesses a child's ability to control and use the large and small muscles of the body, which are the gross motor skills, the fine motor skills. Then the gross motor skill, we have walks without support, walks up and down stairs without assistance, throws a ball and hits a target using both hands, and hops forward on one foot. Fine motor skills picks up a small object using thumb and index finger, traces design with corners or curved edges, ties a simple overhand knot, and cuts paper with scissors on a straight line. Perceptual motor skills are puts a small object into a bottle, stacks a series of cubes vertically, copies letters, numbers, and words, and writes in script. Scoring. Assessment items are scored using a 3-point scale. A 0 typically indicates the child did not attempt the task or the response was not adequate to receive partial credit. This could also indicate an incorrect response or that the child has never had the opportunity to exhibit the skill. A 1 indicates the child may have an emerging skill or may have attempted the task without meeting the criteria considered necessary for the skill to be mastered. A 2 indicates the child's response meets the specific criteria listed in the test manual at the bottom of the page. This indicates the skill has been mastered or the developmental milestone has been reached. Here is a copy of the scoring card. Scoring procedures. To obtain accurate results, the examiner must determine child's age to the month. For that, it is imperative to calculate the chronological age. This can be done by hand or using a calculator. Then begin at the entry point indicated in the chart according to chronological age. You will need to find the bezel and ceiling in order to calculate the raw scores. The raw scores from each subdomain are added up and transferred to the front of the protocol of the scoring sheet. What is bezel? The bezel is established when the child receives a score of 2 on 3 items in a row. If the child receives a 0 or a 1 for any of the first 3 items administered, the examiner should then test backward until the child scores a 2 on 3 items in a row. All questions below the bezel, meaning the questions that come before the 3 2s on the form, are each scored as 2, even if the child would have scored a 0 or a 1 if the items was administered. What is ceiling? A child is no longer able to perform skills with mastery within a certain age range, demonstrated by the 3 zeros in a row. This is the stopping point. There will be times when you will have some items past the ceiling that the child will have received a 1 on. If the items have been administered, or the child might have already received a 1 or a 2 on an item past the ceiling if the evaluator has administered the items. These items are still counted as zeros if they are past the ceiling. There can be several bezels and ceilings. Always pick the bezel and the ceiling that are the closest together when computing the raw scores. Examples. Here I'm going to show you a few examples on each of the domains in the adaptive, motor domain, personal, social, communication, and cognitive. As mentioned before, there is a screening part of the test. So this is the example of the screening part. So communication is receptive. The type of procedure is structure, which meaning one-on-one. This was done one-on-one. The expected behavior of the child is to respond to the prepositions out and on. The materials needed for this assessment are a toy animal, brightly colored plastic ring, 1 sheet of 8.5 by 11-inch white paper. So the procedure is as follows. You will seat the child at a table or on the floor. Place the ring and the sheet of paper on the table or floor 4 to 5 inches apart. Place the toy animal in the ring. Do not use gestures while you give the instructions. Say, the toy wants to get out of the ring. Take the toy out of the ring. After response, say, the toy wants to be on the paper. After doing this with the child, you will score the assessment. In this type of a scenario, you will give points if the child places the toy animal in the correct position. If the child does it for 2 requests, then it's 2 points. If the child does it for 1 request, then it's 1 point. If the child does it for 0 requests, then it's 0 points. Adaptive. An adaptive domain example of this test is self-care. This is for a 12 months to 23 months. The type of procedure is observation interview. The expected behavior is the child feeds him or herself bite-sized pieces of food. No material is needed for this assessment. So in this type of assessment, you will need a parent input or the caregiver. So for the observation, you will observe the child during feeding time to determine whether he or she feeds him or herself bite-sized pieces of food by picking up bits of food with fingers, hands, and transferring to mouth. In the interview, you will ask the parent or caregiver, does your child feed him or herself bite-sized pieces of food? If so, what are some of these foods? How does the child do this? How often does the child feed himself bite-sized pieces of food? You will score the assessment as follows. If the child feeds himself bite-sized pieces of food, typically, which is 90% of the time, then the score will be 2 points. If it is sometimes, 1 point. If it's rarely or never, which means greater than 10% of the time, it's 0 points. Personal social domain example. For this sample, the subdomain is self-concept and social role. This assessment is done for a child 2 years, 6 months through 2 years, 11 months. The type of procedure is structure. The expected behavior if the child identifies himself or herself in a mirror. For this type of assessment, you will need a mirror. The procedures, you're going to give the child a mirror or hold it for them, point to the reflection in the mirror and say, who is that? If the child responds by saying baby, say, who is the baby? If the child definitely indicates that the image in the mirror is him or her, the child scores 2 points. If the child looks in the mirror but does not identify himself or herself, the child scores 1 point. If the child does not look in the mirror, the child scores 0 point. Motor domain example. The subdomain for this example is a fine motor. The age is 4 years and 0 months through 4 years, 11 months. The type of procedure is structure. The expected behavior you will want to accomplish from this assessment to know if the child strings 4 large beads. For this assessment, you will need 4 large 1-inch round beads, shoelace with a long plastic tip. Okay, for this assessment, you will seat the child at a table and sit next to him or her. Show the child the 4 beads and the shoelace and say, watch what I am going to do. I'm going to put these beads on this shoelace. String the 4 beads. Hold them up and say, see what I made? Remove the beads from the shoelace and place them on the table in front of the child. Hand the child the shoelace and say, now you put the beads on this shoelace. If the child does not respond, repeat the demonstration. Allow the child approximately 2 minutes to string the beads. How are you going to score this? If the child is able to string 4 beads, he or she scores 2 points. If the child is able to string between 2 to 3 beads, the score is 1 point. If the child only strings 1 bead, the score is 0 points. In a communication domain example, the subdomain is expressive communication. It's done for a kid 12 months through 23 months. The type of procedures are structure, observation, interview. The expected behavior can be child imitate speech sounds. So the question is, can the child imitate speech sounds? You will not need any materials. For the structured procedure, face the child at a normal conversational distance. Ask the caregiver to identify words or sounds the child says. Say several of these, repeating each several times. Note whether the child repeats. For the observation procedure, observe the child in the presence of older children or adults. Note whether the child attempts to imitate others. For the interview, this will be done with the parent or caregiver. Ask the caregiver or parent, does your child vocalize, babble, or repeat words or sounds when someone speaks to him or her? If so, describe the child's verbal responses in these situations. How frequently does this occur? The structured part is scored as follows. If child imitates or repeats words or sounds, the score is 2. If the child attempts to imitate but is not precise, the score is 1. If the child does not attempt to imitate words or sound, the score is 0. The scoring for the observation interview, if the child typically, which 90% or more of the time, initiates or repeats speech sounds by another person, the score is 2. If the child sometimes imitates or repeats speech sounds by another person, the score is 1. The child rarely or never, meaning 10% or less of the time, imitates or repeats speech sounds by another person, the score is 0. Cognitive domain. An example for the cognitive domain is the following. The subdomain is attention and memory. The age of the child is between the ages of 12 months through 17 months. The type of procedure is structure. The expected behavior or the behavior that we're looking for in this assessment is like if the child follows a visual stimulus. The materials needed for this assessment will be an 18-inch strand of yarn loosely rolled into a ball. For this test, you will seat the child on the caregiver's lap. Attract the child's attention to the yarn by moving it into his or her field of vision. Do not use any sound cues. While the child is looking at the yarn, let the yarn fall to the floor. After dropping the yarn, do not move your hand or arm until the child responds. You're going to be observing the child's head and eye movement. The child does not need to visually find the yarn or on the floor. Repeat this procedure 2 more times. The way that you will score this assessment will be as follows. The child responds to drop yarn by turning head or eyes downward, following the yarn on 2 or more trials. The score is 2 points. If the child turns head or eyes downward, following the yarn on 1 trial, the score is 1 point. If the child does not turn head or eyes downward, the score is 0 points. I have a demonstrational video you'll watch right now, and it's the video you will be able to watch the 5 domains in how are the 5 domain being tested using the 3 types of procedures that I have talked about so far. Oh, sorry.
folding the paper, I fold it over like this.
Well, I could
And then fold it, and then fold it again.
Well, what does that look like? A little tiny book for babies.
Now you do it. Fold the paper like I did.
It's a little bit open.
It's okay. Cut it into 2 pieces. Make sure you cut it on the line. Can you show me?
Do I have to cut it?
Cut along the line.
Can you show me the book that is open? And can you show me the book that is not open? Oh, wow.
That
Can you show me the one that cannot cut? Can you show me the picture that you can cut? There you go.
cut paper.
You can cut paper. Good job. Yeah. If I say hand, which picture would you point to?
I think the glove.
Good. If I say fly, which picture would you point to? Good. If I say egg, which picture would you point to?
Chicken.
If I say talk, which picture would you point to?
Okay, give me 3 blocks.
That's it?
Which one is more? 3 pennies or 5 pennies?
5.
Sit your seat. Which one is more, 8 or 5?
8.
Does your child continue to work on his own when giving a learning task?
Yes.
Give examples of situations in which the child continues to work.
When I tell them to build something with his Legos, or like when I tell him to do his homework, I just put it in front of him and tell him how to do it, and he keeps on doing it himself.
How long does the child continue to work? Like in minutes.
Till he's done.
Can your child organize an activity, find the materials, and work in an appropriate place?
Yes.
Give examples of activities that the child has initiated and carried out.
We made slime, and he knew all the materials that we needed, and he put them together in the bowl, and he mixed everything up.
How frequently does the child initiate and carry out such activities?
Just whenever he's interested in something, whenever he watches a video and it catches his mind.
Does your child ask for help when needed?
Yes.
Give examples of this behavior.
When he can't tie his shoes, or when he cannot reach something, or when he wants to make pancakes or anything that he can't really do on his own, like turn stuff or build something with Legos.
How often does the child ask for help when needed?
Often.
Does the child ask for help in a pro-social manner, like without crying?
Yes.
shouting?
Yes.
I work at Spring Branch ISD, which is located on the west side of Houston. The Battelle Developmental Inventory Second Edition is mostly used at the pre-K and K level. The district has a lot of pre-K centers where they also have P3 programs. SBSD has a large Hispanic population, so the Spanish version is used a lot. It is administered by diagnosticians at my district. These are some of the references I use for this presentation. Thank you for watching my presentation, and I hope you were able to learn more about the Battelle Developmental Inventory.